Well, those are the headlines that we are tracking for you all day today on ET Now. Well, let's first up introduce our very first topic. After a gap of almost about a year and a half on account of COVID-19, on account of the fact that most educational institutions abroad moved to the online mode, many students either continued with their online education but from abroad or deferred their admission. Now, largely, it looks like most universities are once again welcoming Indian students from this academic year. Indian students are making a beeline to the visa offices, to the passport offices. Now, the question comes, how are you going to fund this foreign education? A foreign education is definitely expensive. It's in the double-digit lakh figures, and if you're doing an MBA, it can get even more expensive. So how do you fund it? What are the different schemes available out there? Additionally, as you may have heard it from the headline, the Indian rupee has depreciated, and how? In the month of June itself, it has depreciated more than 2%, and we are at the lowest level since March 2020. That means buying US dollars is going to be very, very expensive. So how do you deal with the constant volatility in the currency as well, especially when an education is something that will last you for 2 years or 4 years? How do you sort of protect yourself against the constant movement in the Indian rupee, especially when it's going to depreciate? To talk about all of this and more, I have with me Vaibhav Singh, co-founder of Leap Finance. Vaibhav, thank you so much for joining us today on ET Now. You have all this experience with respect to foreign education, with respect to funding a foreign education as well. Tell us firstly, what sort of rush are you seeing now? Because once again, universities have reopened after a gap of almost 2 years. So we have a backlog of students waiting to kickstart their academics.
Yeah, no, Mubina, at the outset, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us on the show. You're absolutely right. This particular last few months, the upcoming fall intake has been unprecedented in terms of demand, in terms of just Indian students wanting to go abroad. Almost almost 4 to 5 lakh Indian students now want to go abroad every single year. As you rightly said, for almost the last year and a half, none of them were able to make it abroad. So all that pent-up demand has sort of really stacked up for this upcoming fall intake, and volumes are through the roof. We've to give you some context, we've seen almost more than $250 million of loan requests coming onto our platform.
Wow, that's a huge number. $250 million of loan requests have come through the Leap Finance platform, which does of course help students in fulfilling their education dreams in terms of at least providing the right finances. Now, Vaibhav, how do you make a correct assessment of really how much will you need? Because students sometimes they focus on the tuition bit, but then they forget about the other aspects. So how do you sort of sit down and make a correct assessment of what should be the budgeted amount that you will need for this foreign education?
Yeah, so Mubina, on that, we have a sophisticated decision engine, which takes in more than 300 data points from a host of public and private data sources. And really, you've touched upon a great point there. Many times students, when they're budgeting for study abroad, just keep looking at the tuition amounts, but living abroad can be very expensive as well. And therefore, as someone who really wants to back these students the whole way, we truly believe in supporting the ambitions of these young, bright Indians. Our loan product gives them the whole cost of education, which includes everything around what you need to from your rent, from your groceries, from allowing you to travel back home once a year and things like that. And we've got a sophisticated engine to essentially for each destination, we've got it at a level of, our primary market is the US, for example, and we've got it mapped out for all the popular cities in which Indian students go to, what is sort of, the right cost of living there, added to what the tuition, for the particular program the student's going abroad for, and making sure that the student really only has to think about, getting the best grades, getting the best outcomes from their study abroad, rather than fretting over, how do they meet their living expenses.
Okay. Let's talk then about how, we always say that as parents, of course, if you know your child has to go study abroad, you make provisions for the money, well in advance, 7, 8, 9 years in advance. The longer the better. So you slowly start saving money, put it maybe in an equity fund, etc. And then, of course, as the goal comes nearer, as the student or the child comes of age, 16, 17, etc., just before they turn 18 and they are set to go abroad, you slowly start redeeming those mutual funds or those equity funds, move them to a debt fund, and then slowly start, funding up. Do you think the best way at this juncture, looking at everything that we are in the midst of, and I'm going to ask you to make a very financial judgment as well over here, Vaibhav, do you think the best way to pay for a foreign education is through savings, or perhaps even borrowing is not such a bad idea, given the fact that interest rates are very low as well?
No, absolutely, Mubina. You've hit a great point there. And I'm a firm believer that while obviously some parents, some families can save and can save for maybe even a substantial part of the of the cost of studying abroad. For most, Mubina, as you would fully appreciate, the move abroad now is very much a Bharat story. The low middle classes, the middle classes, the upper middle class are as aspirational about sending their children abroad. And often you will find that savings are not sufficient. And therefore, borrowing becomes almost inevitable. And even if, you did have, a reasonable amount of money stashed up, I think there is there's strong merit in actually borrowing for education. If you think of it, education is an investment. And, if you sort of, are able to lock in the right terms on your financing, then that can really produce outsized returns, not only financially, but also in sort of, your personal and professional life. So, and particularly, putting my financial hat on, as you said, given interest rates are where they are right now, it's a great time to lock in particularly fixed interest rate loans. Which are available in the market, and you can benefit from essentially what is sort of the lowest interest rate regime we've seen in quite a few years.
Vaibhav, the reason why also I ask you this question is that while parents do their bit and save up for the foreign education, sometimes the student as well, or the child as well, does want to be Atmanirbhar in every way and decides that, look, rather let the parents enjoy those lifelong savings that they have kept aside. And, now that there are different sources of funds available and the cost of, financing as well has fallen quite a bit, then why break into that piggy bank of sorts? If students want to fund their foreign education, it very much is possible, because you're lucky enough to be living in an era or living in a period where interest rates are very low. So it's very feasible for 18-year-olds, maybe not 18-year-olds, but maybe at least postgraduate students to be able to procure a loan and fund their education. But speaking of 18-year-olds, Vaibhav, is it feasible for an undergrad student to be able to take a loan and fund an undergrad education, or do you think it could be difficult for them, given the fact that obviously they don't really have too much of a credit footprint right now?
Yeah, so Mubina, that's really the challenge for borrowing across the spectrum. That even if it's a graduate student, they've probably got only a couple of years of credit history behind them, right? A couple of years of work experience at that. And largely that's where the study abroad segment has been severely underserved by sort of, the traditional lenders, the public sector banks, the private sector banks. Because fundamentally, as you would, appreciate, Mubina, you're primarily, as a traditional lender, underwriting basis either collateral, which your parent can put on your behalf, or B, sort of your incomes. Now, in terms of education loans in general, and particularly study abroad loans, it just becomes very hard to, for most traditional lenders relying on very traditional underwriting processes, to be able to determine outcomes of students and therefore confidently be able to lend to them in the absence of all of this data. And really, that is where, we at LEAP saw this opportunity where there is so much data available now today. This is a 20-something-year-old has lived their lives largely online. We have a lot of data about Indians moving abroad and then being extremely successful post their study there. And combining all that data gives us the opportunity to be able to lend to these students with a lot of confidence that these students will produce great professional outcomes once they get out of school, and therefore can repay our loan as well. So it's about really, mashing together all the data which is now available on the student, on the various colleges, on various programs, their potential job outcomes, and therefore, bringing it all together and helping students in the absence of sort of, more traditional data underwriting points.
So how do you compare different institutions, financial institutions available out there? Of course, Leap Finance as well is a lending platform. But if you have to compare all the available sources of loans for students, how do you compare each of them in terms of interest rate offered, in terms of terms and conditions, in terms of whether they require collateral?
Yeah, sure. So largely there are three pools of sort of capital which a student can tap into as they're moving abroad. The first one, I'll just say it for the sake of completeness, is, hey, if you have a relative living abroad, theoretically that relative can come on your loan and you could borrow, in your destination country. So if you've got an uncle living in the US, maybe you get a loan from Citibank US. As you can imagine, that's an absolute sort of outlier scenario. Not many students are unfortunately being, able to avail that. You could go to a bank that could be a private sector or a public sector bank. As you can imagine, you mentioned at the start of the show as well, Nabina, that study abroad, is relatively more expensive. So, the average education loan in India for domestic study is like 2, 3, 4 lakhs. And here you are easily talking 20, 30 lakhs, sometimes much more. And therefore, most of the banks ultimately end up requiring collateral, which again sort of cuts out 95% of the market. If you are in that sort of lucky 5% where you've got a property worth 70, 80, 90 lakhs to pledge, so that you can take out a 40, 50 lakh rupee loan, you'll get a rate in sort of the very high single digits. So in today's interest rate environment, around 9-10%. But at those sort of ticket sizes, banks only lend with collateral. In recent years, a couple of specialized lending NBFCs have come up, and the NBFCs have obviously recognized that there exists an opportunity in this market. This is massively scaling, and there's an opportunity to lend unsecured, because really that's where the market gap is. That's what the student needs. That's how you can sort of really build a scaled up business. Unfortunately, just given where NBFC's own cost of funds lie, most students end up borrowing from NBFCs also sort of in the early teens. So, often 13, 14%, which again is sort of, relatively quite expensive, particularly in the context of, what a dollar loan could potentially be like. And really that's where, we feel we've got a truly differentiated product, because we are able to, while it's a student coming from India, we are able to lend to these students in destination currencies. So if you're going to the US, Leap will give you a US dollar loan. And that really, as interest rate environments are so much more lower in the developed markets versus, still emerging economies like ours, students are able to benefit from borrowing at much cheaper rates just because they're borrowing in dollars. So for example, Leap loans start at 8%. They're completely unsecured. So students can easily save 3, 4, 5 percentage points versus any alternative from an Indian NBFC.
Do you recommend then, I mean, I know you did briefly allude to it about how you can, take a loan directly in the currency of the country that you are flying in. Do you recommend that for students? That if you're flying to Australia, you can borrow in Australian dollars, Canada, Canadian dollars, so on and so forth? What sort of savings do you enjoy then?
Yeah, no, massive believer, Mubina. It's one of my strongest beliefs in setting up Leap the way we have done it. I in my earlier career worked on the trading desk of a global investment bank, so very familiar with the FX market. Strong believer that a student should not be sort of taking any FX risk. If you think about the sort of the loan structure, upfront the student needs dollars, right? That's what they need to make tuition payments. That's what they need to make meet their living expenses. As we all know, also, like, the lion's share, 95, 99% plus of students, once they graduate from school, do end up spending a few years in their country of study as well. So their future incomes are also in dollars, or, Canadian dollars or loonies, whatever, which are depending upon which country you are going to. So fundamentally, if you were able to borrow in the destination currency, then you are essentially, you've created a natural hedge for yourself, because all your, cash outflows initially were in that currency. Your future earnings, your future cash inflows are in that currency as well. You've completely sort of eliminated FX risk. And so, strongest advocate, you not only, and to your point around costs, these are small retail FX transactions, small in the context of the global FX markets. And so you easily end up paying, one, sometimes even 2 percentage points of FX spread, which on a, as you can imagine, on a 50, 60, $70,000 loan over a period of time can easily cost the student a few $1,000s by borrowing locally in INR versus borrowing in the destination currency.
Well, I think this was a very interesting chat indeed, helping all of this prospective foreign education students out there in funding their foreign dreams. And I hope we've given you some guidance on how you can independently do so as well, with minimal or zero help from your parents. On that note, we'll let you go, Vaibhav. Really appreciate you joining us today on ET Now and on The Money Show.
Thanks for having me, Mubin.